everybody. Welcome to another episode of Politically Depressed. As always, I'm your host, Eamon McAdam. Today I was intending on doing an episode about the Olympics, about the spectacle, and just kind of a similar reflection that I had about like the Golden Globes and the Champions League or whatever, the European Cup and Eurovision and these types of things in the light of this ongoing genocide. But then something happened that has made that kind of impossible. And I've actually tried recording this episode several times, and I get about 10-15 minutes in, and I end up just kind of getting too frustrated, so I stop. And so I will preemptively apologize that I don't think this is going to be a complete episode, but I feel compelled to release an episode a week and not leave y'all hanging or whatever. So I decided to record this and just whatever happens, whatever comes out of it. I'm not going to push myself to do the full analysis that I had been planning or the full kind of whatever. Basically, news came out a few hours ago that a missile had fallen on a football field in a Druze village, Majd el-Shams, in the occupied Golan Heights. And 10 children were killed between the ages of 10 and 20, and about 20 others were injured. And almost instantly, the Israeli propaganda machine, known as Hasbara, through its IDF spokesperson, through official and unofficial channels, have been doing the most cynical and just disgusting three things simultaneously. One, without any evidence, they're blaming Hezbollah for this attack. Two, they're claiming to feel sad. Arab children were killed. Israel doesn't give a shit about Arab children. In some cases, they're claiming them as Israeli citizens. They are not Israeli citizens. They are Syrians. They are Syrian Druze Arabs in the occupied Golan Heights, which the Israelis have occupied illegally since 1967. And third, they are instrumentalizing this as essentially casus belli, as an excuse to increase their aggression on Lebanon. And it's at once disgusting and terrifying, and what's really upsetting about all of this is that there's not a single moment to grieve the murder of these 10 kids, of this attack on this town. And for me, very personally, as a Druze, this has a second, a third, like a multi-leveled kind of pain, seeing Druze sheikhs pick up pieces of body. Anyway, so it's deeply frustrating, and it is increasingly. I just watched a clip from Arab News, I think Al-Quds, wherein the anchorwoman, the journalist, says that she had spoken to an Israeli civil defense worker who was quoting someone. He said he wasn't going to quote on air because he could get arrested if he did, but quoting someone who was there at the time, who says that this was an Iron Dome missile that sort of misfired and landed on this football field. And what's increasingly clear is that this is not an intentional attack by Hezbollah, that it might not even be a misfire, which I won't discount as of yet, but it very well may be an Israeli Iron Dome missile that landed on this football field, killing these kids. And now they're using this horror, this atrocity, to beat the drums of war and push on with what they've already wanted to do, what they've declared they've wanted to do for months now, which is to increase and accelerate their aggression on Lebanon. And that is so fucked up and so terrifying. And I find myself kind of unable to fully process it. Again, as I said, I recorded this episode several times. The first time I stopped because I broke down crying. The second time I got so frustrated and I just started yelling, and I wasn't able to slow myself down. And this is, I think, the third or fourth time And what I've decided to do, I'm just going to stop by the time it gets too much. But I did want to release this because I think it is also important to note that there are so many voices, particularly those who speak on behalf of Palestinians, who, are supportive, who are calling for a ceasefire and end to the genocide, dismantling of Zionism, who, for them, places like the occupied Golan Heights only come into existence once it's attacked by Israel. And I find that really, it's not problematic, it's damaging. Because the narratives I've been seeing, the ways people are writing about Hezbollah, about the resistance, or about places like the Golan Heights, the occupied Golan Heights, there's so much kind of ignorance. And it's hard to call out this ignorance because, A, we need all the voices we can get, and this is very clear. B, it feels like nitpicking at a time when we do need to be like very unified, mobilizing against this genocide, against Israel, against US imperialism, against authoritarian regimes. But that third part always gets left out, as in the failings, but also the atrocities of regimes like Syria. I don't know. There's this one thing that's deeply frustrating, wherein you see a lot of people who have been writing for months now about Palestine. They're just so deeply disappointing to me, because at the same time, they're quoting notorious Assadists. And so the Golan Heights is such a specific site of this, because people in the occupied Golan Heights, Arabs rather, and Majd al-Shams, this village that was just attacked, has had a very long history of resistance and opposition to the Israelis, to the Zionist entity, but also to the Assad regime, right? There's a very popular narrative that Hafiz al-Assad, as Bashar's father, didn't lose the Golan Heights, but sold it to the Israelis. This I won't speak on too much because I want to do some research. I want to know more about this. I don't know enough. But this is something that I've heard from countless Syrians. It was a very popular chant during the revolution. And it's just a kind of almost like common phrase, that they call Hafiz al-Assad the seller of the Golan, So what's deeply frustrating, and also, this implicates Hezbollah as like completely tied to the Assad regime and has been for 10 years, but even longer, but as in like with it in its, genocidal campaign against Syrians in Syria. Regardless, so in coming to the defense, and a lot of this feels so useless to say, a lot of it, this is why it's so difficult to say, because the Israelis are clearly, they don't give a shit one way or the other. They are going to go ahead with their plans. They don't care. Even if there was a photograph of the Iron Dome cartridge. Oh, another thing I saw on Al-Quds, they are preventing journalists from getting too close to the site because it can be demonstrated. If it was a Hezbollah rocket, there can be photographs of that rocket. If it was an Iron Dome, there are photographs of the fucking thing that's left over. But anyway, so I don't know. I just find it so frustrating that the same people who are at once victimized by both the Assad regime and the Zionists, who have been opposed to both, and now you have a lot of these people who are super opposed to the Zionists, but have for at least a decade been championing the Assadists and Assad regime and Assad himself. And how can they be actual allies or comrades to the people of the Golan Heights, while holding those contradictions? To me, it's just deeply frustrating. And I find myself increasingly kind of depressed and worried and disappointed. And seeing some of these people who are kind of rising the ranks, who are becoming a bit more popular because of some of their writings, some of which are very good, but knowing where that's situated, knowing their other positions on other issues which are intimately tied. I don't know, it's so deeply frustrating, and I have very little to say about. I have a lot to say, but it's very difficult, and I'm very worried about how any of this is going to be interpreted, and I don't feel like I have the capacity at the moment to do this interpretation, to kind of segue from certain narratives towards what I'm trying to say. And so, I don't know. I just came across several pages that really frustrated me and should know better, but there is so much current to a lot of this thinking. And I know I'm being a bit vague here, but there are communities who are caught in the middle. And I'm realizing that I'm getting to this limit that I was sort of predicted earlier. So I'm sorry if this is a shorter episode. I'm sorry if I'm not as coherent. I am deeply, deeply, deeply worried about an escalated war in Lebanon. I was supposed to be there. I booked tickets for the 25th of July, but I did not feel comfortable. I felt terrified. I canceled those tickets. I postponed my trip. And maybe I made the right choice, because fuck. It really does seem like they're gonna do some shit with this incident, regardless of who did it, regardless of where that missile came from. And I don't know. I really don't know. So I'll just wrap it up there. I hope everyone else is doing all right. I hope everybody that's listening is doing whatever they can to pressure their governments, the institutions they belong to, whether we're talking about in the workplace, academia, or whatever, even within the family, to agitate, to inform, to push, because we really do need all hands on deck. And yeah, I just hope you're doing everything you can to support the people of Gaza, but also to, push for a ceasefire. Push for, it's not just a ceasefire, I don't even know what we're pushing for anymore. Oh god, okay. So, khalas, I'm gonna wrap it up there. This has been another episode of Politically Depressed. If you like this podcast, there's a tip jar below, or you can become a member of our Patreon. Again, I'll put the link below. Yeah, I guess that's it for me today. I'll see you all next time.